Until quite recently, the worlds of Rockstar's finest masterpieces that were filled with so much detail and prowess had never touched the scope of the screens I utilized in order to enter worlds of pure wonder and depth. I always knew that Rockstar was one of the most talented developers in the industry, that they were pioneers in every right, either it be the eccentric world building within their games or the encapsulation of the way in which they fill their worlds with so much life and detail. I'd played a few of their games before briefly, not really understanding what made them so special in fact, and I had put all of them down before giving them the time they deserved. This was until I played Red Dead Redemption 2 at the start of 2020. Red Dead Redemption 2 revealed the absolute mastery of Rockstar's talented developers, and after it became my favorite game of all time. I was definitely intrigued enough to play the first game. 3 years later and I did, and somehow, someway, Rockstar just doesn't miss. This video is very fittingly shaped around my perception that Red Dead Redemption is indefinitely the perfect Western story in all aspects. That isn't just a title for fun, and I truly believe that Rockstar was able to visualize everything that so perfectly defined the tropes of a Western and perfected and refined them to differentiate the game from the hundreds of typical Western movies and stories out there, creating a world and story so perfect in the way it is presented. For mostly the centerpiece of any good Western story to me is the way in which the protagonist is crafted within the world that they inhabit. The greatest Westerns, either it be Clint Eastwood's movies and even to a degree books like Blood Meridian, understand the importance of the protagonist in shaping the implications of the world that they inhabit. The protagonist has to be outwardly condemned and exalted in their nature against the rest of the world. The lawlessness, the horror and the sins that they commit has to play a center role in what defines their actions within the game or story. You might be thinking for a second, wait, John is now a refined and new man, clear from the past that he once endured. You'd be completely wrong there in almost every degree, as it is clearly evident that John's past continues to haunt him, to imprison him in the cage of the cowboy stereotype. He may not outwardly want to go out and murder, to pillage and to destroy, but his past has defined that his present and future will not stray far from the actions that he committed across his life. As John says, people don't forget, and it seemingly reflects his character in almost every manner. John did try to forget, establish a family, but others don't forget the atrocities he committed in order to get to such a stage, and that past, those atrocities he committed, will forever be the stain on his attempt for happiness. He is continuously condemned as an animal and as a savage, but this is not as direct as this game's prequel makes it out to be, because John has taken the persona of a civilized man, but the beckoning of the civilized for the removal of savages warrants his death in the same manner it does any other outlaw. In the same manner, Red Dead Redemption has its protagonist condemned by the rest of the society, even sometimes in a subtle manner like the train cutscene at the very beginning of the game. Red Dead Redemption still wields the tropes of any Western out there. It's got the cowboys, the lassos, the revolvers, the uncivilized speech, the saloons, the savagery, and the disappearance of any sense of honor. Even though this game sets itself at the tail end of the Wild West, it preserves such notions of any Western but changes them in order to fit a story where the outlaws are no longer the centerpiece of the world. Rather, they are the savages that need to be wiped out, the ones that couldn't evolve with the rest of the people. John attempts to move on, but the life he once had doesn't allow him to escape. He fits right into the stereotype of an outlaw. He looks natural in it, and damn knows how to work it as well. He isn't just any outlaw, but he's a damn legend, and the world makes sure you know that, but it makes sure that you know that's also the reason you're condemned, and that you'll always be condemned no matter what you do to change it. As well as how Red Dead Redemption presents itself in a story manner, the game isn't shy about the way in which it presents its Western landscapes. The game breathes an aura that is innately Western. Every aspect of the game's presentational value is so authentic to the image of a Western that truly does elevate the game's position as a Western tale. Rockstar games are absolutely ingenious in the way that they shape this game's world and general atmosphere in order to best fit the image of the Western that they wanted to create. Despite the fact that the game is set at the tail end of what was considered the Wild West, it isn't shy in relaying the tropes of the genre that have made it so popular, as well as reinventing how these are interacted with in order to create an experience truly authentic in every single manner. The way in which you can waltz into a saloon and grab a drink, or how you can walk into a sheriff's office staring at the various bounties on offer, picking one up and going for the hunt. Red Dead Redemption truly masters the elements of presentation and its ability to relay its Western inspirations. I was surprised in the manner in which you could just walk into a bank, for example, in the sequel to this game, Red Dead Redemption 2, and how the game allowed you to simply interact with it in a natural way that didn't feel deterrent to the game's overall feel and sat right with the vibe of the Western world that the game hoped to create. But even Red Dead Redemption 8 years prior allowed the player to interact with buildings and places in the same way. It understood that for a game to truly align itself with the Western fantasy, the game needed to wield the opportunities and gameplay mechanics for the player to outwardly feel free enough to do so, but in the same way restrict it indirectly through the use of a system we'll be talking about later in the video. All the ways in which this game is presented is natural to the archetype of a Western. Mechanics such as a bounty building are ones that seem so simple and uncharacteristically unique, but in an entirely different scope, these same facets are what build up the game as a whole. That's the authenticity of the Western persona of this game. Even without the landscapes it serves you throughout, from the desolate deserts of one environment to the sprawling simplicity of the rocky exterior of Mexico, to the bustling towns of the game that range in architectural design depending on whether you're in New Austin or roaming about as a foreigner in Mexico. It's all so well crafted and well done that the Western fantasy is unnaturally captured in a way that was seemingly so inconceivable in the years leading up to the game's release that it almost seems like a supernatural feat that Rockstar has pulled off. In addition to this, the game's interactions with the various individuals roaming the world, all with distinct personalities and desires, differentiates the game from many other open worlds out there too. The interactivity with Rockstar's open worlds to almost all of its degrees is still unmatched by most open worlds even today, and even Red Dead Redemption perfectly represents that ability of Rockstar's talented developers. Red Dead Redemption never was a game that boasted its gameplay as the core center of what made the game so amazing. Its ability to serve the Western fantasy in a manner that is entirely authentic is what makes the gameplay here so enjoyable. Rockstar doesn't completely deviate from what their previous creations wielded, with much of this game's overall feel in terms of roaming, interacting, and gameplay mechanics similar to other games within Rockstar's arsenal at the time, such as GTA 4. But it's the Western ideas and tint that allows Red Dead Redemption to feel like an entirely new experience, one so differential to that of other open worlds but still feel relative within the realm of Rockstar's other experiences. However, the Western ideas that Rockstar slaps onto this game isn't just placed there in order for the player to perceive the game as different, but rather in many ways Red Dead Redemption wields mechanics and systems that truly make it different to anything Rockstar has ever created before. There's a lot to break down here, and it's best to even cut this section into core topics that need to be discussed in order to dissect what the gameplay here in Red Dead Redemption truly represents to the player. Firstly, the traversal mechanics. John Marston fits right in with the stereotype of an outlaw, with his dusty, dull-colored hat reflecting nicely with that of the desolate landscapes he trudges through on a day-to-day basis. He roams on foot in a way that looks kind of silly, I'm not gonna lie, but his main form of transport is always in his trusty and loyal steed. The horses within this game definitely feel a little outdated. The mechanics of its stamina and the way in which it rides definitely doesn't feel as intuitive as other games with horses as their main mechanism of traversal, but Red Dead Redemption still makes traversal an enjoyable experience. When comparing Red Dead Redemption to that of other Rockstar games, the game doesn't deviate too much from what other games created by Rockstar have done, and has kept the idea that traversal should be fun in all aspects. Riding on John's horse through the landscapes of the Western era is an experience so entirely enjoyable and liberating, making the exploration here an absolute treat to delve into. There's just so much to explore either on foot or on your horse or even a wagon, that the endless opportunities within the game make the world feel so entirely gargantuan that in a single playthrough, I don't think you can truly understand the beauty and grandeur of the world mustered up by the talented developers at Rockstar Games. The interactivity of the exploration within this game is unmatched by any other game out there in terms of the game's release date and games surrounding that generation of gaming. Rockstar truly pushed the boundaries of what was possible within the scope of an open world, creating a game that truly enhanced the player experience of freedom above all else, as well as the exploration mechanics of the game and the manner in which the player can interact with every facet of the game's world. The combat isn't far behind in how relevant it is to the game's overall tone and the way in which you interact with the beautiful landscapes presented to you. But I think before that, the atmosphere of Red Dead Redemption's world is also unique for a Western in itself. Red Dead Redemption 2 also crafts an atmosphere that is quite unique, but I think that Red Dead Redemption nails this entirely unique idea of a Western where the grittiness of the landscapes, the horror and the violence of the Western frontier doesn't feel like it's been patched up, rather that the wound has been entirely opened up for all this time, that it's getting further and further infected, that the world around you can't cover itself, that the horrors within this land are open to you. I never felt this sort of atmosphere in playing Red Dead Redemption 2. This idea that the grittiness of the world was reflected in a way that made the game almost feel like a horror game in some moments, and the music reflects this in a great manner as well, and roaming around the world of Red Dead Redemption feels entirely unique in almost every aspect of it. Now back to the combat of the game. The gunplay isn't anything special in any regard. It feels very similar to that of GTA 4 for example, at a surface level, with different guns mixing up the way in which you play the game, but the game still plays in the same sort of way no matter what weapon you use, because the approaches to combat still remain the same. And if I do have any criticism, and of which is a criticism for pretty much any Rockstar game, is the way in which the open world is used within the gameplay moments of the game. Rockstar still to this day seems like a firm believer in its open world being at the centerpiece of the beauty of its world and of the story, but when it comes to the actual mission design of the game, the philosophy of Rockstar seems to be one stuck to that of traditional game design, where the missions are designed in a linear fashion that truly doesn't enhance the experience of the game through the utilization of the open world and its mechanics. I'm not talking about how you ride around a horse during a lot of the missions or how you can run around in some mission, but it's the approachability to different encounters within the game that will be able to truly elevate the experience the game gives the player in regards to their freedom to experiment. Every encounter kind of felt samey in the way in which it plays, and the only thing that saves the game from such a large problem is one ability that alters the entire game, and in the same way has kind of defined a core aspect of what is to be Red Dead's core combat mechanic, and that's Deadeye. Deadeye seemed like a rather simple mechanic, and that's because it kind of is. The mechanic isn't anything revolutionary, nothing amazing, and in a way it's kind of something that is just sort of borrowed from that of previous Rockstar games, and that's the Max Payne games, where Max can slow down time in order to time his shots, in order to precisely kill his enemies. John Marston doesn't deviate far from his roots, rather borrowing this ability in his own endeavors as well. But the ability, despite its less than revolutionary scope in the overall scope of gameplay, truly pieces the gameplay systems of Red Dead together cohesively. Deadeye entails the ability of John Marston to slow down time, and again like Max Payne, being able to space his shots and even choose the core points of his foes' bodies in order to strike them down in a way that reflects his absolute skill and power in the gunslinging art. And that's probably why I like Deadeye so much as an ability, and that's the way it kind of fits so perfectly into the overall character of John Marston, of his outlaw life, and how the ability innately reflects his absolute mastery of combat, and how his ability to shoot is one so driven within him that has become so natural that it feels as if he's slowing down time. It fits like a glove onto the story of Red Dead Redemption, and it really fits well to that of John Marston's character, where his persona as a tough, relentless cowboy out there to save the ones he loves allows him to hone in his abilities to such a degree that no other gunslinger in the Wild West or anywhere across the globe is able to match his skill and expertise when it comes to combat. This comes in beautifully during the various duels within the game, of which themselves are so well sculpted, fitting entirely to the image of the Western scope that drives the genre, and Red Dead Redemption's ability to reflect this in its dueling system is also fantastic. The tension of duels, the waiting, and the reflexes of you and your opponent on the small distance between you is what defines who is going to win and who is going to end up a bloody pulp on the floor. And with John's mastery of gunslinging, dueling feels almost second nature to him, that he's so accustomed to it that it doesn't faze him in any manner. The different weapons of combat ranging from the rifles to the revolvers also do well to mix up the combat here, making it feel fresh, which it definitely needs to be, as the game's center is driven through the combat in every way. The last component of the game's gameplay that I want to discuss is something so core to the actions you commit in the game that also in a way define how you perceive John Marston within the narrative of the game, and that's the honor system. The honor system at the forefront is a rather simplistic measure of the good and evil you commit throughout the game, but it breaks down into something much more complex of the player's own motives and aspirations within the game. The way in which you interact with the world, treat its people, and the unquestioned way of life is what defines you in the world of Red Dead Redemption. The honor system is what characterizes your version of John, this idea of freedom within the gameplay mechanics that differentiates this version of John Marston you create to that of other people. But most also observe their actions from the lens of a narrative perspective, the lens of what John himself would do. When you observe it from such a manner, I feel that what you do in the game either way is a reflection of John's inner self in almost every way. The gunslinging, brooding, murderous John is one reflective of his past life, the one he tried to leave behind, but the loss of his family in his life has let the beast of his past life run outwards, making him seem like a maniac set on a mission for fulfillment, to sacrifice all those around him in order to get what he wants. And in some ways it does make sense, although I am of the opinion that John's new life has instilled a sense of empathy that was almost lacking entirely in his past life. The idealisms he wielded within that era of his life is still within him, a beast that is chained, and you the player have the ability to release it. But in the same vein, his new life has proposed idealisms to him that were once so foreign. In many ways he does embrace these ideas into his life, and of which makes him a much better man. He may do good, work for good, and try to help others, because that's what he didn't do in the life he lived before, and the killings, robberies, and horrors he inflicted in his outlaw life can only truly be atoned for through the repenting of generosity, or maybe one can never truly atone for the sins of their past life. There's already countless videos out there that delve into the intricacies of the story of Red Dead Redemption, and many provide a much better and detailed synopsis of the main story than I could ever do. So in order to differentiate this section of the video to the critiques of other people out there, I want to delve into my own personal thoughts of the story, what makes it so deep and impactful, and the general message and themes that the story perpetuates, which makes it so endearing in the first place. I've got to say first that the story here lives up exactly to my expectations, and in most cases exceeds them entirely. After playing Red Dead Redemption 2, I was unsure whether this evolution of what the Red Dead series was would mean that the quality of Red Dead Redemption would be in its old age, and that the story wouldn't leave the same lasting impact. I was gladly mistaken on pretty much every front. Going into the game, I was already strangely of the opinion that John Marston was my favorite character of the series, even above Arthur Morgan, despite the fact that I hadn't even played Red Dead Redemption yet. I just found the story of redemption, sacrifice, and this determination to stop the cycle of violence enacted by John Marston so intriguing, and I was excited to see how this would be played out in Red Dead Redemption. John himself is an absolutely fantastic character, one with so much emotion and drive that makes him a force to be reckoned with in the old frontier, and at moments his ruthlessness in wanting to save his family, to strive for his mission, is what makes him so commendable. In order to discuss the tenets of the story served here, we'll have to break it down into the core messaging of the story, which is innately derived by its various themes that radiate throughout the game's runtime. One of the greatest themes of the game, and of which overcast upon the series as a whole, is the idea of a conflict between an old world of different idealisms against that of a changing and newly reformed world. Within Red Dead Redemption, this is ever more clear than it ever was in the game's prequel, as here, instead of the beginning of the end of the West, the tales of the West have almost completely disintegrated into dust, with the Old West no longer dominant within the plains of America. This is evident by the reform of the idealisms of the people within the game, with the very first scene of a ferry highlighting this drastic change from the stubborn and old ways of the life of the West and the rapid work of industrialization and new technology that has made the West completely redundant in the eyes of the majority of society. The world is no longer filled with that of stubborn outlaws, individuals that cause carnage upon all else for their own benefit, but instead the world has moved towards the idea of civilization. The story highlights the ending of the West, and this is perpetuated by the continuous hunt to end those that still breathe the aura of the West, and that's within the cast of the game itself, where some individuals accept the taming of the land and accept the intricacies of new technologies changing their lives in a dramatic fashion. There is still the hardened way of life that was adopted by so many in the West, and they are reluctant, even hesitant, to the degree that they will continue to cause the carnage of the Old West to send a message to remind those that want them gone that they will never truly leave the lands in which they once used to rule. Characters such as Bill Williamson, Javier Escuela, and most importantly Dutch Vanderlyn are completely insensitive to the idea of civilization, and in Dutch's case this turns into an outward self-imposed battle to challenge the ideals of the people that now rule the country, to kill and pillage for the sake of the preservation of a life he seems the most fit for freedom and liberation. Dutch Vanderlyn is obsessed with his battle both inner and outer to challenge the idealisms of the new lands of America, and he is too stubborn to ever let go of the old ways of life, and this is reflected in almost every manner of interaction that we have with him, and that transitions into the idea of moral choice. Where Dutch and the old frontier believe in the goodness of their own actions, so does the government. There is a constant conflict between those two factions throughout the entirety of the game, and it's a struggle that is still never ending, where the outlaws outwardly reflect a sense of brutality and carelessness in their actions, continuously killing and causing rampage upon the unsuspecting individuals of the world. The government also do so, just in a manner that is reflective of their stranglehold on society and the desire to eliminate all outlaws and all so-called savagery, highlighting their absolute hypocrisy. The two sides do not wield any large moral advantage over one another. Instead, they both are equally horrendous in their actions to rule the world, to rule society, and to prove a point that enhances their position within the lens of the people. This is reflected by Dutch's quote before John kills him, where he lets John know that despite his attempts to do so, he will never truly fight change. The change is inevitable, and the change will not isolate certain individuals despite its promises to do so, and that even if the times change, even if the outlaws are all wiped out, the government will always find reason to hunt you down, that they will always find another person or group to blame. The story truly relates this cycle of the government villainizing certain individuals and groups, and indefinitely that's how they maintain their power over the people that they preside over. The idea of a moral choice either sitting in the camp of good or evil is not so clear in Red Dead than it is in any other games or media. There is never truly a good side or a side that is innately evil, because both sides in many instances may be as worse or as good as one another. The government agents who at the forefront may seem good in the perspective of a societal lens are not good in any sense. Edgar, Ross and Archer believe they are good, despite the fact that they cause more mayhem and dissatisfaction with the people of society than the help that they actually provide them. Just like how outlaws are engaged in activities that only affect their status and wealth, the government is also a follower of this same philosophy, but the manipulation serves them well in doing so in a manner that is not so obvious to the average person. But then we think about how some outlaw gangs such as that of the Vanderlyn gang once used to rob the rich to give to the poor, and we truly question who serves the light of good within this conflict. Dutch often followed the idea that in order to bring forth a future that was brighter than the one we currently inhabited, there was a necessity for violence to be enacted, that it was the only true way for change to affect the world in a positive manner. Dutch believed that through the carnage and the killings, the world would be reformed into one that was much better than its predecessor, and he isn't afraid to commit evils that no others would do in order to achieve his vision. But even we think about how Dutch seems to be evil to us in the lens of John Marston. It is clear that even John isn't entirely reflectant of anything that is innately good either. John Marston may believe he is a reformed man, but it is obvious by the way into which he reintegrated into the life of the savage outlaw that he never truly left those idealisms behind, that they crowd his mind every single day, and that he will forever bear the sins of his past. past. John has killed hundreds, robbed thousands of dollars, and stolen from all those that were more fortunate than him for the purpose of his own betterment within the small bubble of a society he lived in. But unlike Dutch or Javier or Bill Williamson, John does realize that his way of life was never going to be sustainable going into the future, that to continue on the path he treaded on would only cause him distress and eventually kill him. He reformed himself and changed his idealisms in order to try and fit into the narrative of the civilized society we see within the game. And when he eventually does put his old hardened gloves on once again, he seems neutral in most approaches, that he doesn't care about which side is right, and his idealisms do not ever truly align with one side anymore. But we of course determine the path he will go on. The way in which he will save his family is completely dependent on the actions of the player controlling him. We can see him as a man that is truly reformed, one that helps others and only does what is necessary in order to get what he wants. But in the same manner, it isn't hard to see John again as the cowboy with a temper, one that was so bloodthirsty and was out for vengeance that his sense of morality was once again shattered, despite his thoughts telling him of a reform that he had gone through. Despite this, whatever path John chooses, the outcome of his end is always going to be the same. John's life reflects a broader message of one's past always being part of them, that they can never truly outrun the path that they once used to tread on. John must and now may display a persona of a man that doesn't outwardly challenge the tropes of a changing society, but forevermore his past does catch up with him. He lived a life of crime, one that was absent from any sense of true morality, that despite his attempts to put it all behind him, there is no clean way for one to get out of such a life, and they will never truly atone for the sins that they committed. John believes if he does what the government tells him to do, he will be free of the evil that he committed, but that just isn't true. Instead, John's redemption comes through the justification of his sins, which is only achieved in his death. When John sacrifices himself in order to save his wife and son Jack, he does so in an attempt to protect them from the horrors of the life he lived. Especially in the case of Jack, John's sacrifice is innately an attempt in order to stop the cycle of violence, for Jack to live a life that was truly normal, and that he would not be hunted and humiliated like his father before him. That is what the purpose of John's sacrifice always was. He wanted to stop the violence, to make the cycle completely halt. And in many ways, all of what I've said leads to one of the game's core messages, the idea of generational violence. And in pretty much every way, John's sacrifice was a noble attempt to stop this generational cycle of violence, and he wants Jack to be the one that was truly reformed and changed. But as we play through the epilogue of the game, it is obviously apparent that Jack did not take heed to the sacrifice of his father, instead following in his footsteps despite the horrors of the outlaw life that he outwardly saw throughout his own life. It is fascinating that despite the fact that Jack saw the horrors of the evils of his own father, he instead decides to delve into it, and his obsession with vengeance blinds him to the whole purpose of his father's sacrifice in the first place. And that's what the story is truly about. The cycle of violence will never truly end. The savagery will prevail, and that one's sins will always catch up to them, no matter how hard they try for it to not to. I think this video has ended up being the longest video I've ever made. That wasn't a compilation of videos, but rather just a single video. I honestly wish to make it longer, but I didn't want to sacrifice the quality of the video for what I wanted to do in terms of quantity. And because I don't have much experience in creating videos this long and cohesive, I want to get into a groove for it by slowly and gradually easing myself into it. Depending on how this video does in the long term, I'd like to make a more cohesive and deeper analysis of games like this video. And actually, one of my next videos will be a deep dive into Red Dead Redemption 2, just like I did here. That might actually end up being longer than this video because that game is even bigger and is easily my favorite game of all time. There's going to be a lot for me to break down there. If you did enjoy this video, consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this in the future. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.